Welcome to Clear Enough, where we explore how to begin, be heard, and break free, even without knowing everything. I'm Drew, and I believe you don't need all the answers to start. You just need to be clear enough to take the next right step. Hey friends, welcome back to Clear Enough. I'm glad you're here with me today. If you've been following along, you know that we're working through the 3 pillars of this project. Clear enough to begin, clear enough to be heard, and clear enough to break free. Today we're digging into that second pillar, clear enough to be heard. Because here's the truth. It doesn't matter how many brilliant ideas you have if no one actually listens. And one of the biggest traps we fall into, especially in our professional lives, is thinking that being charismatic is the same thing as being credible. Spoiler alert, it's not. Charisma might grab attention, but credibility, that's what keeps it. That's what builds trust, and that's what sustains influence over time. So in this episode, I want to break down the difference between charisma and credibility, why people overvalue charisma, and how you can build real influence even if you're not the most charismatic person in the room. Along the way, I'll share a few stories from my own career that taught me some pretty hard lessons about this. Let's start with definitions. Charisma is about personality. It's about the spark someone has when they walk into a room, the quick smile, the confidence, the ability to tell a joke or drop the exact right phrase at the exact right moment. Charismatic people make you feel good. They make you want to listen, and honestly, they're fun to be around. There's nothing inherently wrong with charisma. In fact, it's a powerful tool. But the danger is when charisma is all you've got. Because charisma on its own is surface level. It can sway opinions for a little while, but if there's no substance behind it, no follow-through, no actual results, then eventually people stop listening. Credibility, on the other hand, is deeper. Credibility is earned. It's built over time through things like reliability, humility, consistency, and preparation. I had a mentor once who told me, the only thing you bring into the room is credibility. That line has stuck with me. Think about it. When you walk into a meeting, your team already has more combined knowledge than you do. They've already got the reports. They've already got the data. They've already thought about the problem. So the one thing you carry with you, your one asset in that moment, is whether they can trust you, whether your track record makes them want to take you seriously. That's credibility. Let me tell you a story about a place I used to work. This company had a very charismatic CEO. He was electric in a room. He could talk to anyone, connect over anything, and make you feel like you were part of something special. I wanted to believe in him, and for a while, I did. But over time, cracks started to show. Promises were made that weren't kept. Projects were announced with a lot of flair, but then fizzled. The culture started to feel shallow, and eventually I realized something that was hard to admit. Charisma had gotten people in the door, but there wasn't enough credibility to keep them there. That experience changed how I think about leadership and influence. Because at first, charisma won the short game. It got buy-in. It made people excited. But credibility, or the lack of it, was what decided the long game. Later, when I moved to a different company, the vibe was completely different. The leaders weren't flashy. They didn't try to charm everyone, but they admitted their mistakes. They followed through. They set realistic expectations. They built trust slowly, brick by brick. That company wasn't built on charisma, it was built on credibility, and that made all the difference. Journal prompt number 1. I want to pause here and ask you, can you think of someone in your life who is charismatic but not credible? And then someone else who may not be flashy but who you trust completely. Which one would you rather work with long term? If you're listening while walking or driving, just think on that. If you're at home, maybe jot it down, because recognizing the difference is the first step to deciding which one you want to build for yourself. So what does credibility actually look like in practice? I think about it like a line graph. We all have ups and downs. We all have days we blow a deadline or miss the mark. That's part of being human, but credibility is about the overall trend. Over time, are you reliable? Do you consistently show up? Here are a few ingredients I've noticed. Reliability, doing what you say you're going to do, and if you can't, owning it quickly. Humility, admitting when you're wrong, asking for help when you need it. Consistency, showing up again and again, building a track record of trust. Preparation, not winging it, coming to the table with thought out input that makes other people's jobs easier. And resilience, when things go sideways, failing fast, fixing it, and moving forward. Here's the thing. The more credibility you have, the more grace people will give you when things don't go as planned. If you've built a reputation for being reliable, then when you walk into your boss's office and say, "Hey, I can't deliver this exactly the way you asked," they're much more likely to say, "Okay, I trust you'll figure it out." That kind of trust is priceless. If credibility is so much more powerful, then why do we overvalue charisma? Honestly, I think part of it is cultural. We live in a world that rewards the people who can capture attention: politicians, salespeople, influencers. The ones who know how to entertain and persuade often get rewarded quickly. And again, I don't think charisma is bad. In fact, it can be really useful skill. If you can tell a good story, if you can hold attention, if you can present an idea in a way that makes people want to listen, that's a gift. But here's the key. Charisma should enhance credibility, not replace it. Charisma might get you heard once. Credibility makes people want to keep listening. Journal prompt number 2. Quick check-in. Which do you tend to lean on more in your own life, charisma or credibility? If you had to pick one, which one would you say defines you more right now? If you're comfortable, shoot me a message or share it on social media. I'd love to hear your answers. So far, we've talked about charisma versus credibility, why charisma gets overvalued in the short term, and why credibility sustains influence in the long term. Now I want to get more personal. I want to share a story from my own career where credibility, not charisma, opened a door for me that I couldn't have walked through otherwise. Then we'll get practical and talk about how to build credibility when you're not the most charismatic person in the room. I once worked for a boss who, honestly, I really admired at first. He was smart, talented, and good at what he did. But over time, I realized that our management styles were just different. And those differences created friction. It wasn't a toxic environment. It just wasn't the right fit. Now here's the tricky part. I knew deep down that I needed to move on. For my career, for my family, for my own sanity. But I also didn't want to burn bridges. I didn't want to leave in a cloud of drama or anger. So I made a choice. Even though it wasn't the best fit, I was still going to show up every day and do my best work. I was still going to be reliable. I was going to give 100%. And here's what happened. When it finally came time for me to sit down with him and say, I think I need to start looking for other opportunities, I was terrified. He could have reacted badly. He could have fired me on the spot. He could have made my life miserable during the transition. But instead, because I had built credibility over time, because he knew I was reliable and consistent, he trusted me. He said, I know you'll keep showing up while you figure out what's next. I appreciate your honesty. And that simple decision to keep doing my best even when I knew I was leaving gave me breathing room. It gave me the freedom to be selective about my next step. I didn't have to take the first offer that came my way just to pay the bills. I could wait for something that was a better fit. The next role ended up being incredible. It was meaningful work with trustworthy leaders who valued credibility as much as I did. I honestly don't think I would have landed there if I hadn't had the space to search intentionally. So the lesson was clear. Charisma might have helped me in the short term, but credibility gave me options. It gave me freedom. It opened doors I didn't even know were possible. Let's zoom back out for a minute, because you might be wondering, okay, but what does credibility look like on a daily basis? We already talked about reliability, humility, consistency, preparation, and resilience. Let me break those down with a little more color. Reliability means your word carries weight. If you say you'll deliver something on Tuesday, people know you'll have it on Tuesday. And if you can't deliver, you tell them before Tuesday, not after. Humility means you're not afraid to admit when you don't know something. You don't pretend, you don't fake it, you're honest about your limits and willing to learn. Consistency is the steady drumbeat, not flashy, not showy, just showing up again and again, building a track record of trust. Preparation means respecting other people's time. It means you don't walk into a meeting empty-handed. You've thought about the problem, you've considered solutions, and you've done your homework. Resilience means that when things fall apart, and they will, you don't collapse. You adjust, you fix what you can, and you move forward. Here's the kicker. Credibility is built slowly, but lost quickly. You can work for months or years to build a reputation for being reliable, and then lose it in one careless moment of dishonesty. That's why credibility is precious. And that's why, in the long run, it matters so much more than charisma. I want to circle back to this question because I think it's important. Why do we overvalue charisma? Honestly, it's because charisma feels good. When someone is charismatic, we feel good around them. They make us laugh. They make us feel seen. They validate our biases. And in the moment, it feels like they're the answer. The problem is that feelings fade. When the results don't back up the words, the shine wears off. Think about it like this. Charisma is like sugar. It gives you a quick hit of energy. But credibility is like protein. It sustains you. And just like with food, too much sugar without enough protein eventually leaves you sluggish and unsatisfied. Journal prompt number 3. So here's something for you to think about. In your own workplace, are you more drawn to the sugar of charisma or the protein of credibility? Which one do you find yourself relying on when you're under pressure? All right, let's get practical. What if you're not naturally charismatic? What if you're not the life of the party? What if you're not the person who can win over a room with a joke and a smile? That's okay. In fact, that might even be an advantage because it forces you to lean on credibility. Here are some ways to build influence when charisma doesn't come naturally. Do your homework. Be the person who knows their stuff. You don't need to be flashy if you consistently bring thoughtful, prepared input. Be reliable. Deliver what you say you'll deliver. Over time, this track record becomes influence. Communicate clearly. You don't need to be funny or charming, but you do need to be clear. Practice boiling your ideas down to their simplest form. Admit mistakes quickly. Nothing builds trust faster than saying, I messed up. Here's how I'll fix it. Listen well. Credibility isn't just about what you say. It's about how you respond when others speak. People trust those who actually listen. And here's the thing. Influence built on credibility often outlasts influence built on charisma. Charisma might get you the microphone once. Credibility keeps people inviting you back. Now, I don't want you to hear me saying charisma is bad. It's not. In fact, when it's paired with credibility, it can be powerful. Think of the leaders you admire most. Chances are they're both credible and charismatic. They're trustworthy and they know how to capture attention. But if you have to pick one to build first, pick credibility. Charisma can enhance credibility, but it cannot replace it. Journal prompt number 4. Here's a question I'd love for you to reflect on. If someone described you at work, would they say you're more charismatic, more credible, or a balance of both? And maybe more importantly, which one would you like to be known for? We've been digging into credibility versus charisma, what each means, why credibility wins the long game, and how you can build influence without needing to be the most magnetic person in the room. In this final section, I want to zoom out and look at credibility across the arc of a career. I want to talk about why it matters most when the stakes are highest, and why it's never too late to start building or rebuilding credibility. Let's be honest, credibility looks different depending on where you are in your career. When you're just starting out, credibility is about being dependable, showing up on time, following through, asking thoughtful questions. You don't have to be the smartest person in the room. You just have to be someone people can count on. Once you've got some experience under your belt, credibility shifts into demonstrating competence. People expect you not to just show up, but to deliver results. They want to see you solve problems, not just identify them. At higher levels, credibility expands again. Now it's about trust and judgment. People watch how you make decisions, how you handle conflict, and whether your words and actions align. At this stage, charisma might open doors, but credibility keeps them open. Eventually, credibility becomes legacy. Are you someone others turn to for guidance? Are you remembered as someone who lifted others up, or as someone who cut corners? At this stage, credibility is less about what you achieve personally and more about how you've invested in others. The thread running through all these stages, credibility compounds. The habits you build early on, being reliable, being honest, taking responsibility, create a foundation that you can keep adding to. Here's another angle to think about it. Credibility doesn't matter most when things are going well. It matters most when things go sideways. When everything is smooth, charisma can carry the day. People are relaxed, they're open to persuasion, and they're less likely to scrutinize. But when the stakes are high, when money's on the line, when deadlines are looming, when there's a crisis, charisma wears thin. People don't want promises. They want reliability. I once had a project that went completely off the rails. The timeline was impossible, the resources were limited, and everyone was panicking. And in that moment, the people who mattered weren't the most charming ones. They weren't the ones who could make everyone laugh. The people who mattered were the ones who could say, here's what we know, here's what we don't know, here's the next step. That's credibility in action. Not pretending everything's fine, not overpromising, just calmly and consistently doing the next right thing. And here's the bonus. If you've built credibility before the crisis, people will listen to you during the crisis. Your credibility becomes your currency. Journal prompt number 5. Pause for a moment and think. When was the last time you were under pressure at work? Who did people turn to? Was it the most charismatic person or the most credible? Okay, but what if you're listening to this and thinking, that sounds great, Drew, but I've already messed up. I've missed deadlines. I've dropped the ball. I've lost trust. Is it too late? The answer is no, it's not too late. But rebuilding credibility takes time, and it takes humility. Here are a few steps to start rebuilding. Own it. Acknowledge the gap between what you promised and what you delivered. Don't make excuses. Apologize specifically. General apologies don't mean much. Be clear. I said I'd do X and I didn't. I'm sorry for the impact that had. Set realistic expectations moving forward. Instead of overpromising, make smaller commitments that you know you can keep. Deliver consistently. Over time, the small wins stack up and credibility returns. And finally, ask for feedback. Invite others to tell you how you can improve. Listening goes a long way in restoring trust. Here's the hard truth. Rebuilding credibility takes longer than building it the first time. But it's still worth it. Because once people see that you've owned your mistakes and are committed to growth, they'll often respect you even more. One of the most underrated ways to build credibility is by saying 3 little words. I don't know. Think about it. How many times have you been in a meeting where someone clearly didn't know the answer, but tried to fake it anyway? It never lands well. Now contrast that with someone who says, I don't know, but I'll find out. That builds trust because it shows humility. It shows you're not trying to protect your ego. You're focused on finding the right answer. And here's the kicker. When you admit what you don't know, it makes people trust that what you do know even more. Earlier, I shared a story about how credibility opened a door for me when I needed to leave a job. Let me expand that idea. Credibility creates opportunity because people want to work with people they trust. Think about promotions. When a manager is deciding who to elevate, they're not just asking who's the smartest or who's the most fun. They're asking, who can I trust to represent me well? Who will follow through? Who will do the right thing when no one is watching? Think about networking. When someone refers you for a job, they're staking their reputation on your credibility. They're not going to risk that for someone who's all charisma and no follow through. Think about entrepreneurship. Customers come back not because you had a slick pitch, but because you delivered what you promised. At every stage, credibility creates opportunities that charisma alone can't sustain. Journal prompt number 6. Ask yourself, if someone recommended you for a big opportunity tomorrow, would it be because of your charisma or your credibility? You've heard me say this before, but it bears repeating. Clear enough isn't about perfection. It's about taking the next right step. Credibility fits right into that philosophy. You don't have to have all the answers to be credible. You just have to take the next right step with integrity. When you mess up, credibility means admitting it. When you succeed, credibility means sharing credit. When you don't know, credibility means being honest. It's not flashy. It's not glamorous, but it's powerful. And over time, it changes the trajectory of your career and your life. So let's recap. Charisma can open doors in the short term. It can get people's attention, but without substance behind it, the shine fades. Credibility is built on reliability, humility, consistency, preparation, and resilience. It compounds over time. In times of crisis, credibility is what people cling to, not charisma. And if you've blown your credibility, it's not too late. But rebuilding requires humility and consistent action. Ultimately, credibility creates opportunities that charisma alone can't. And here's the key. You don't have to choose one or the other. If you can add charisma on top of credibility, fantastic. But if you have to choose, start with credibility. Because charisma without credibility is a hollow shell. But credibility without charisma still stands strong. Final journal prompt. So here's the final question I want to leave you with today. If people at work were to describe you in one word, would you rather they say you're charismatic or credible? And more importantly, what are you going to do this week to build credibility in a way that lasts? That's it for today's episode of Clear Enough. Remember, you don't have to be the flashiest person in the room. You don't have to have all the answers. You don't even have to be the loudest voice at the table. But if you're reliable, if you're humble, if you're consistent, if you're credible, you will build influence that lasts. So go out there this week and take the next clear enough step toward credibility, because that's where the real power lies. Thanks for listening to Clear Enough. If today's episode connected with you, share it with a friend or leave a review. And remember, you don't need to know everything. You just need to be clear enough to take the next right step.